So with regards to how the brain learns, there were some recent discoveries substantially supporting the components of differentiation in the classroom. We're coming to your favorite topic. Is differentiation considered a paradox or good practice when it comes to developing a brain-friendly classroom, and why?
Repeat the last part of that for me, Erica. I almost got it, but not quite enough.
Is differentiation, not a problem, is differentiation considered a paradox or good practice when it comes to developing a brain-friendly classroom, and why?
Well, again, what's fascinating to me after a teaching career that's over 50 years now is that for most of my teaching career, virtually all of it, well, the first part of it, if there was a lot of any kind of science to support teaching, it totally missed me. I did not study teaching in college much. And so I didn't even have that background. But in the beginning, where people understood how to teach was talking with people who were successful and trying to figure out things on their own. And then we sort of got into a little bit of research on psychology, and that informed a fair amount of my teaching, although I came in when there was a big shift in psychological research. But for most of my career, that's where the information came from. That's what taught us. And then there began to be research in pedagogy. And so we had our own eyeballs, and we had psychology, and we had research in pedagogy. And only in very recent years have we had neuroscience to, enter the scene on that. And what's been so fascinating to me in those few years that educational neuroscience has been available to people like us is that I have yet to see anything in neuroscience that really contradicts what psychology already said, or that really contradicts what excellent practice has always looked like. To me, what I keep seeing over and over is that educational neuroscience explains to us the physiology behind the psychology. And so I see us do many things in our classroom that are not brain friendly, but those are not things that are advocated by neuroscience, and they are not things that are educated by research in psychology or pedagogy or even classroom observation. We do them because they're habits. So to me, there's no paradox, there's no contradiction between differentiation and differentiation. What I have tried to do through my whole career is grow that model so that as our knowledge has grown, I've been able to take slightly different directions or slightly different emphases to be able to make it a representation of good practice. That's what it is, and what it should be to me is what is good practice as we know it from those various areas. There are places where, where psychology may contradict something that we thought in pedagogy or vice versa, though those don't happen too much. And there are spots in some of our practices where neuroscience says, no, not really, don't go there. And so you change those as you go. And an example of that is that during the years that I first began teaching, there was a lot of research in the early 1970s on learning styles. And several researchers, a couple of whom were particularly prolific and at the time well regarded, who began writing about learning styles. And the research they were doing was very supportive of their findings. But as we have gone over time, and particularly with the understandings that neuroscience gives us, we find that those were, that we need to go a different direction. And what's interesting is that the research in the 1970s was the standard they were meeting. They couldn't meet a 2020 standard in 1970. So it wasn't that they were charlatans or, villains trying to do something wrong. They were working with the best of what they knew how. We do that in medicine, we do that in architecture and lots of other places. So when something like that comes up, then you sit and look and you think, okay, so if not that, then what? What is it we're trying to do? How can we keep the intent, but change the vehicle for getting there? And I think that's how we grow in any field. And that happens in differentiation or anything else where we're watching. So to me, my intent has always been to use beautiful classrooms, the science of psychology, of pedagogy, and now neuroscience, to talk about what that practice would look like. So to me, those should be hand in glove, not paradoxical or contradictory.
Teachers in differentiated classrooms could strive to enhance a growth mindset with their students. Can you elaborate on this?
That's Carol Dweck's work, and she's a very fascinating woman in terms of her research. And that was the thing that she has always wanted to pursue. It's her answer to the question, what is life and who am I in it? What's the crux of this whole thing called life? And many of your viewers, and certainly you, know this, but she didn't really begin with a growth mindset. She began by studying what happens when students are motivated to learn because learning is wonderful versus motivated to get a reward. And so she did a lot of research on that over the years and has been very clear in the difference there. But as a part of that, she began working with growth mindset, and they're linked a lot. And what she found there was that if you have a teacher who looks at you with real possibility and says, you know what, there's so much that's so cool inside of you that you've never had a chance to tap. My job is to kind of make that happen and to help you work with me on it. And if you have a teacher who seems to believe very strongly in you and teach you as though you're capable, you're much more likely to begin to believe that you're capable and work like somebody who's capable. So Dweck has said now for several decades that a teacher with a growth mindset is one who believes that the brain is malleable, that brains can develop just like bodies can if we work with them in the right way, that kids given wonderful opportunities to learn can learn almost anything they need to learn. And that's true for the vast majority of kids in our schools, and that our job is to reflect that to kids. And in the beginning, that's what people were hearing from her. But after a while, folks began to say, but, you know, when we do these tests, the kids don't always get better. Many times that's because a study was funded for 2 years and you can't do very much in that length of time. We get a lot of strange things happening there. But she came out and said, wait a minute, what you're doing is studying whether if kids work hard, they get better. No, can't just do that. You have to teach them how to work wisely, because they don't understand how to work wisely. Then it's like just beating their heads against the wall and not getting anywhere because they don't understand what good habits of mind and work are. So that's a real part of it. And she has continued to write about that. I've been interested in reading things now that kind of come from neuroscience, where you can bring the two together and say, but there's a third step there. And of course, this is where I'm going to land, because this is my hobby horse that I ride all day, every day. Growth mindset is imperative for student growth. I think when you have teachers who don't believe in you, especially if you don't believe in yourself, that's debilitating. But just believing is not enough. You have to learn how to have agency as a learner so that you can captain your own ship. But in that process, I think neuroscience shows us that there's a third piece, and that is that you have to give kids incremental challenge, so that what work they're doing today is a little too hard for them. Moderate challenge is what brain science calls it, I think, and it's what Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development. Work has to be just a little too hard. And there again, that's two disciplines saying the same thing. And so what that means in my classroom is I have to understand those concepts. I have to have the essence of everything for everybody working together. But when we actually get to dealing with the fine points and transferring it and applying it, I really have to make sure that the kids are working a little too hard for them individually. And that's going to mean that there are times when the work has to be tailored to their particular needs. I think brain science, educational neuroscience supports all of those ideas. And I think that we're going in a great direction when we buy them. It just causes us to have to change. And change is not something that many of us embrace a lot. And so it's not really that we don't know where to go. It's just that it's hard to change. And as one person said, nobody likes change except a wet baby. And so unless we have lots of people working with us to support us in the change, and sometimes even causing us to change, we don't change very readily.
When we talk about differentiation, we often consider how to teach differently for the lower ability pupils, and we sometimes overlook those children who are talented and gifted, who want for additional learning and require challenge, which is a core to a growth mindset. How important is it for the teacher in the classroom to reach out to those children who aspire for more, who want to be challenged and be pushed further? And therefore, how does the teacher and the student mindset influence differentiation implementation in the classroom?
You know, as you know, I worked was affiliated with gifted education for a long time, learned a lot in that process, and taught classes with students who were identified as gifted or should have been. But at those same times, I was a little weird in that I would see kids in other classes that I was teaching, or watch some of them sitting in the hall a lot during classes because somebody had put them out of the class because they were not behaving well, so they're sitting on a chair in the hall, or see some of them in the principal's office fairly frequently because they're being disciplined. And I would think to myself, you know, that kid's got an amazing sense of humor. That kid is so practical with what he does. I don't know why people are teaching that kid like he's not capable. So I had a principal who was willing, and I would go to him and say, I'd like to request that you put these 5 students in this advanced class next year. And he would frequently raise an eyebrow, but he would always put them in there. And they were always fine. They were always fine in there. I think it's critical, and we do bright kids a real disservice when we let them come to school, make A's that are reasonably easy for them to get. It doesn't mean they don't work or they don't worry about it, or that some bright kids just don't care and don't work hard enough. But for the most part, many of our really bright kids are under challenge day after day, year after year. And so we send them away. We're in a situation where they have not learned that their capacity can expand. And probably even worse, they have learned to resent being asked to do challenging work. Many bright kids have a very distinct fixed mindset, and it often has something to do, at least, with my grandmother thought I was smart because I walked so fast, and my mother was so excited because I read really young, and I've gone to school, and for several years, everybody said, oh, look how smart he is, and I got straight A's. And then I got this miserable teacher in 8th grade who kept saying, that's fine, but it's not good enough. You're not stretching yourself. That's mean. She's asking me to do more. She didn't ask me to do that. That's not fair. And sometimes you even get parents coming in saying, my child has never made anything but A's. What's wrong with you? Because he got a C this time. My child is not a C. And what we're doing there is taking away from them agency. We're giving them the sense that they have reached the pinnacle when they're not even close to stretching. And that's as damaging as it is if we have a student who's really lagging behind and we don't work with them to fill in the holes that are in their understanding. So I think that challenge for high-end kids is critical, and it takes understanding for a teacher to see what advanced looks like and what the next step in advanced is. And it takes some real understanding for that teacher to know how to cajole and wheedle and encourage and sometimes demand that the kid move a little further, even if he doesn't want to, in exactly the same way that a really good athletic coach pushes a kid a little too far, not too far, but a little further all the time. But I want to come back to that and to say, I think we really harm children who are struggling in school when we spend all of the time with them beating on those things they can't do so that they never have a chance to do anything wonderful. We just keep going over and over the same reading problems, sometimes really for 12 years in their careers. And that's who they become, the kid who can't read or the kid who can't do basic computation. Whereas if we opened up things and gave them amazing things to work with, and then gave them things that they needed to do with those amazing things where they had to use those skills and found that prescribed time to help them see how to use those skills to do that task, I I think we would be dignifying those kids much more, and they would not leave school feeling hopeless and useless. They would leave seeing themselves as capable and worthwhile. I also want to say that I think one of the groups that we shortchange the most is the kids that we see as just average. These are my grade level kids. They're, right where I'd like them to be. They're not great, but they do fine with what we're doing. And most of the time they do stuff okay. And that's who the textbooks were written for. And that's where the reading level is. And so, they're just average, don't need to do anything for them, should worry not much, but a little about those advanced kids and a lot about the strugglers. I'm a big fan of what I call teaching up, which is to say, let's start teaching with something that would really stretch the minds of those kids who are most advanced, and then scaffold up for other students so all of them have the opportunity to work with truly amazing things. I don't think we help ourselves or kids when we classify them as struggling or behind or below grade level or above grade level. None of that stuff is relevant. We ought to be saying, what wonderful things can kids do to learn, and what pathways can I build to help all kids move in that direction? Long answer to a question. I don't think
excellent answer, though. An excellent answer that everyone needs to hear.
End of lecture.